Okay, good morning, everybody. On behalf of World Jewish Congress North America, I am so happy to welcome you. My name is Betty Ehrenberg. I'm the Executive Director of World Jewish Congress North America, and today we are very excited to have two guests who are very near and dear and close to the World Jewish Congress North America and American section. We have with us Congressman Ted Deutch of Florida, Democrat of Florida. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and on its Middle East Subcommittee and on the Judiciary Committee, among others. He has introduced the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in Congress and the Holocaust Remembrance Amendment. We have with us from Canada, Member of Parliament Anthony Housefather, who is the representative of the Mount Royal riding or district in Montreal. He has served as chair of the Justice and Human Rights Committee, and he is parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Labor. He has received acclaim for the strong statement that he made for fighting against BDS in the House of Commons. So let's begin. I will ask you some questions and we'll have a conversation. Congressman Deutch and MP Housefather, you have recently become part of a coalition of elected officials that have taken upon themselves the task of fighting anti-Semitism. Since there are many organizations and NGOs who are already working on this, can you tell us when and why you decided on this? And let's start with Congressman Deutch and then we'll move to Mr. Housefather. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, thanks, Betty. It's really wonderful to be with you, Anthony. Good to be with you again, just seemingly a few hours after we were last together on our first program with our new interparliamentary group to combat online anti-Semitism. And look, Betty, the issue, and you understand this and the viewers understand, there's no line anymore. The online, offline boundaries between those two ecosystems don't really exist. And so hatred that takes place, anti-Semitism that takes place on the streets spills over to and from hate that was online. We don't have those borders anymore. We don't have geographic borders given the global hatred and global anti-Semitism, and it requires a global solution. And so we started this task force with members from the United States and Canada, Israel, the UK, and Australia to bring together parliamentarians who are committed to taking on the issue of online anti-Semitism. There are so many examples, whether it's the things that TikTok has overlooked, Twitter's refusal to flag recurring tweets from the supreme leader in Iran, anti-Semitism on Facebook, Google's defense of some really horrific images that come up in certain searches, that we decided coming together with a unified and global approach would actually give us the most leverage to take these issues on and to try to affect change that will create safer spaces online for the Jewish community and ultimately for everyone.
I agree. And first of all, also great to see you, Ted, and great to be with everybody. As Ted mentioned, one of the reasons we're not there to replace advocacy groups. As members of Congress, as members of Parliament in our respective countries, we actually have legislative powers and regulatory powers in order to take on companies that are often as large as the size of governments in some places. And when you talk about, companies like Facebook, companies like Twitter, the power they have is enormous. And what is unreasonable would be for 100 different countries to impose 100 different rules on social media platforms. That would be something that they would rightfully say is unmanageable. But if we're able to agree on a consistent framework and then have our legislatures work together to coordinate consistent policies with respect to these social media providers, I think we'll advance the equation. And where we can really help is coming up with a consistent definition of anti-Semitism, for example. The IRA definition that's been adopted by Canada and 30 other countries is one example of something that we can then say to social media platforms, use this definition, it is internationally accepted. And one thing that is also important, we're not there to impose censorship. there's been a real misnomer there that the goal is for government to ban speech. We're not there to ban speech, but we are there to say, look, if you're flagging tweets from, from other elected officials, you should most certainly be flagging tweets that are anti-Semitic in nature, coming from the Supreme Leader of Iran, denying the Holocaust and threatening the extermination of the state of Israel. And working together, I think we're going to make a really positive impact in this area.
So, Congressman Deutch, how is this going to work? How will you assemble all this information, all this research? How will you process it? Will there be a systematic approach to all of this? And how will you disseminate it? To who's going to be your target audience?
Well, first, we actually had our first global hearing, I guess, Anthony, is that what we called it? Yesterday evening for some of us, night for others, morning for our friends in Australia, with presentations from some of the groups who are committed to combating anti-Semitism. It operated much the way a congressional hearing would, where we had testimony from these experts. We got to ask them questions. And from that, the hope is that, as Anthony pointed out, we'll be able to come together with some common steps that we can take in each of our countries. There is the systematic approach, again, as Anthony referred to, and as we discussed last night, the systematic approach starts with the fact that these are shared concerns and shared threats. We acknowledge that the law is different in each of our countries, but by coming together this way, taking in these proposals, looking for ways to have a combined approach, that's our goal. Also, just one last thing, Betty, we had a really terrific meeting yesterday, but the goal also is to expand this to legislators from other countries. And I know Anthony and I have both already heard from parliamentarians in other countries in Europe, and there's some interest in Latin America. It's a global, as we said, this is a global threat. And by systematically approaching this with testimony from experts in each of these countries, we'll be able to come up with an approach that we think can work worldwide.
Well, we're going to have a new Congress soon here in the United States. Do you think there'll be any new members who will join?
I'm quite certain that there is, there's real interest in Congress. Some of the new members I've talked to, not specifically about this, but we have a congressional task force to combat anti-Semitism, and that will absolutely grow with the inclusion of some of the new members once they're sworn in January.
And one thing that's important, Betty, as well is, Ted has, as Ted mentioned, we're going to have a bipartisan approach to this issue. This is not a Democratic issue, a Republican issue, a liberal issue, or a conservative issue. In every one of the countries that we're represented in, we've ensured that we have people on all sides of the aisle to make sure that we're attacking this from both the left and the right. I mean, it's easy for us sometimes to forget that anti-Semitism exists on our side as well, and we have to be ferocious in attacking it wherever it is in the political spectrum. And this has to be a completely bipartisan approach.
So let me ask you then, since we're going to talk about bipartisan, we've seen different attitudes in Congress, and I think in the House of Commons as well, regarding Iran. And I'm mentioning this because, Anthony, you already alluded to it, but I would just say that anti-Semitic threats lead to attacks, and they're often tied to terrorism. And we see this in many places. Terrorism comes from many different sources, but there's a lot of it that leads right back to Iran. So can you describe, both of you in your respective houses, what is the attitude towards stopping Iran from continuing its support for anti-Semitism, such as having Holocaust denial cartoon contests, fostering terrorism, threatening Israel, and threatening the West? We might as well throw that in. Go aheid, Ted, please.
Oh no, Anthony, go ahead. You take this one first.
Okay. So this is one that is not complicated. liberals and conservatives alike voted in favor of a resolution in our House of Commons about a year and a half ago to condemn Iran for its genocidal attacks on Israel, for its state-sponsored anti-Semitism, for its state-sponsored terror. And basically we said we wouldn't restore diplomatic relations of any type with Iran until such time as Iran ceased and desisted from this behavior. So we have no embassy, we have no official diplomatic relationship with Iran. Of course, as a result of the plane that was shot down over the holidays in January, we needed to have some dialogue with Iran because there were many Canadians on this plane that was shot down through the actions of the state of Iran and their negligence, at least let's call it that. But it's very clear that we need to take this threat seriously. And one of the ways that, and Ted is very involved in this, is Iran Accountability Week that we do every year. We do it in Canada, but we do it across the world. And Canada joins the US and other countries in sponsoring at the United Nations many resolutions that deal with this issue and that condemn Iran on an annual basis. And we will continue to work with our allies. But one of the things is we need to have allies to work with. And we're looking forward to working even more closely with the United States, you know, and cooperating with Western Europe and other countries of similar minds on this issue.
Yeah, I would just echo Anthony's comments. In the United States Congress, there is strong bipartisan recognition of the many activities that Iran engages in, sponsors, promotes, that are dangerous to the world, that violate human rights, that are anti-Semitic, that persecute, that violate human rights of their own people, and whether it is stopping Iran from the spread of dangerous weapons, or preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons, whether it's their support for terrorism or the violation of human rights and the ongoing anti-Semitic utterances that come from the Supreme Leader and others, there is broad support that the United States needs to stand with our friends in Canada and our friends around the world who recognize that this is a threat, and that it's a threat that affects all of us. And so that's we'll continue to see that, by the way, not just with the new Congress, but we'll continue to see that with the new administration when it's sworn in January as well.
Thank you both for that. That's very important and a priority agenda for World Jewish Congress. I'd like to ask you, since you both have dealt with anti-BDS legislation and resolutions, what can you see in terms of continuing strong support for Israel as we enter a new political phase in North America? Do you think that the Abrahamic Accords will help with a better attitude towards Israel? Could we see perhaps less discrimination against Israel, a lowering of the tone in the BDS world?
Do you want to go first on this one, Ted?
Yeah, sure. Look, I can't predict how those who wish to engage in anti-Semitism, those who participate in boycotts of the Jewish state of Israel because it is the only Jewish state in the world. I can't predict what they're going to do. I can tell you, however, that I am confident that what we've seen with the signing of the Abraham Accords, the strengthening of the relationship between Israel and other countries in the region, the recognition that there is just more to gain for countries to be allied with Israel, to benefit from all of the ways that they can work together, from economic and technology to defense, recognizing the threat of Iran. Those benefits are significant enough that we've now seen the UAE and Bahrain and Sudan come forward. I think we should expect to see that continue going forward into a Biden administration. President-elect has been clear in acknowledging the importance of these developments and the need to work with our allies to continue to expand not just the Abraham Accords, but to work with our allies to continue to find ways to expand and strengthen the relationship between Israel, our great ally, and our friends around the world.
I mean, I just want to echo that. I mean, I think, again, the Abraham Accords are incredibly important. The more Arab countries that Israel is able to establish diplomatic relationships with, the more it strengthens our position in North America in terms of advocacy for Israel. And of course, it also strengthens our position in dealing with Iran, because you're the enemy of your enemy becomes your friend. We all can rally around the animosity we all have and the fear we all have of Iran, and that will help Israel as well. So one of the things that we had looked at doing in Canada this year was a tour of colleges. We were going to have parliamentarians of all parties do hearings at colleges, which are, in Canada at least, the number one place where you really find the ferocious BDS attacks on our students. This has become the hotbed, at least in Canada, of where you really find BDS advocacy. And of course, COVID sort of stalled that. But I'm hoping to do that next year when people are back on campus and things are back to normal, and hopefully we've beaten this virus, because I really think that the people that most suffer in North America because of BDS are the students that leave high school, go off to college, and are suddenly confronting a virulent type of anti-Semitism on campus that most of them have never experienced before. And I think we need to do much more to help our students on campuses have the tools necessary to confront BDS. And that, I think, is a useful goal of both our advocacy organizations and parliamentarians, in the coming years.
Yeah, Betty, if I could just add to that, we in Washington, we've had hearings both with our own congressional coalition to combat anti-Semitism and also the House Judiciary Committee that I serve on have held a hearing on the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that I introduced. And in both cases, we had the opportunity, as Anthony points out, we heard from students who expressed to us the impact that the BDS movement has on some campuses. This make no mistake, this is not a free speech issue. There are students who are fearful to walk across the central lawn, the quad, the diag for those of us who went to Michigan. There are those who are afraid to do that wearing a Jewish star or a kippah because they're afraid of what's going to be hurled at them verbally. And our goal here, as Anthony points out, I think needs to be, one, to help equip young people with the ability to stand tall and proud, but two, to make sure that we don't have an environment where we tolerate the kinds of threats that too many students feel on campuses, certainly in the United States and Canada and other places in the world.
So let me ask you both, and this is very important. We also monitor carefully anti-Semitic incidents on campus, and we try to support the student groups who stand up and fight for their rights. So there's really a twofold question over here. First of all, what do you think can be done to strengthen the rights of Jewish students who are experiencing anti-Semitism on campus? And second of all, in Congress, we urged Congress to support the Never Again Education Act, which would provide funding for teachers, teacher training schools to help further Holocaust education. Do you think, what is your opinion about the effectivity of Holocaust education? And we did this in response to the appalling surveys that showed that young people in particular are just ignorant of the events that happened in the Holocaust and what can happen when people are hateful and when people are bigoted and what it could lead to. So again, what do you think can really help strengthen students' rights on campus to fight anti-Semitism or to defend them against anti-Semitic attack? And do you think that Holocaust education could help, and how we might further that?
I'll go first on this one. So the AGC's recent survey that showed the number of Americans that didn't know what the Holocaust was a damning indictment on our education system, and we have similar numbers in Canada. One of the things that we've been doing here is working with Holocaust remembrance groups, with groups that advocate for genocide prevention, to ensure that curriculums, the educational curriculum at the secondary level, includes mandatory modules on Holocaust education. In my province, so my state, in Quebec, the government has now agreed in grade 10 to introduce a module on Holocaust education. And I think that needs to be done in all public schools. There has to be a clear path where people learn about all genocides, but in particular the Holocaust. And with respect to the BDS on campus, one of the things that I've been working the hardest on, and that's not through legislation because it's hard to legislate that, it's through advocacy, direct advocacy from a bipartisan group of parliamentarians and from community groups, is to have universities take far more seriously their obligation to prevent anti-Semitism on campus and to treat all groups equally. For example, the administration at McGill, which is one of our biggest, most important colleges in Canada, and one that's my alma mater for law school, and one that has a very significant proportion of Jewish students, probably 10%, had a newspaper that was refusing to print any pro-Israel or anything to do with something that was against the feelings of the editors, which were pro-BDS. And we had to the school had to force the newspaper to allow counter views to be printed. We also were able to successfully petition, after multiple votes by the Students Association to support BDS, the constitution of the school. The legal group of students recognized that it was a violation of their own constitution to do it, so those votes have stopped. And I think it's a campus by campus approach where the leadership of the student groups on campus and the leadership of the campus has to be roped in and have to work with us to achieve that on individual campuses.
Thank you.
Sure. I would just add on the issue of college campuses in the United States. It's important. We thought that it was important for the Department of Education in Washington to have some better tools to identify and identify cases of anti-Semitism on campus and to stop them. That was the impetus behind the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. We weren't, for a variety of reasons, we weren't able to pass that legislation. President Trump ultimately adopted a good part of it in the executive order, which I was supportive of, in order to provide some of the tools and recognize the importance of the IHRA definition in making clear that that anti-Semitism can't be tolerated on college campuses. And going forward, I think that needs to continue to be a focus, making sure that, as Anthony points out, that the colleges themselves have an understanding of what's happening on the campus, why what they think might be okay is in effect permitting the flourishing of anti-Semitism on campus. So that's one piece. As far as the education generally, that claims conference survey was so stunning in its results. The fact that over 10% of the respondents had never heard of the Holocaust, and nearly 2/3 didn't know that 6 million Jews were murdered, and the fact that such a significant percentage weren't sure it happened or denied it altogether. I think that was about 10% too. It just drives home the importance of Holocaust education. I'm sitting probably 15 minutes from the high school that generated some, in my district, that generated some attention globally when the principal was fired. because he couldn't acknowledge that the Holocaust was a fact. This is a real issue that we have to confront. I'll just finish with this. In last January, we marked International Holocaust Remembrance Day by going to Auschwitz. Speaker Pelosi led a bipartisan delegation to Auschwitz to mark the liberation of the camp. And then we went, Betty, as you know, then we went off to Jerusalem for the event at Yad Vashem with leaders from around the world. Upon returning, almost immediately upon returning to Washington, we passed the Never Again Education Act to empower the Holocaust Museum and others to work to enhance Holocaust education across our country. And I've, just to close this loop, I've been in touch with the Holocaust Museum after what happened in this high school here in our community, in Palm Beach County, a community that has good Holocaust education. It's clear we need to do more. So we're hoping to be able to use that legislation that we passed in Washington and perhaps come up with a program that can be a model that brings together not just students and Jewish groups, but groups from throughout the community, the full diversity of the community, to recognize that if we fail to remember the Holocaust, we're creating a situation where hatred, anti-Semitism, and broader hatred can lead to terrible results again. We have to do a better job of educating young people.
Well, please note, yeah, go ahead, Anthony, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I completely agree with what Ted said, and I think his act was something that we should look at emulating in Canada if we could ever get bipartisan consensus on it. When we talk about Holocaust education, I think it's important, going back to our previous conversation about Iran. On October the 28th, just a couple weeks ago, the Supreme Leader tweeted, "The next question to ask is, why is it a crime to raise doubts about the Holocaust? Why should anyone who writes about such doubts be imprisoned while insulting the Prophet is allowed?" And the Holocaust denial and Holocaust cartoon contests coming from Iran, to me, are a national security issue. I think we also have to look at anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial in the light of national security. It ferments doubts, it ferments hatred domestically. And one of the things where we look at anti-Semitism as a multiculturalism issue, as a local racism type issue, I think we also need to look at it as a national security issue. It reminds me every time when I read what the Supreme Leader of Iran is writing, how important it is to have a double look at how anti-Semitism is treated domestically.
I could not agree with both of you more. First of all, I'd like you to know we stand ready and willing at World Jewish Congress to help you in all of this. So shoulder to shoulder, as they say. We have one program called aboutholocaust.org, aboutholocaust.org. It is done in partnership with UNESCO, and it is really designed to teach basic information about the Holocaust to people who don't have this background and who just don't know. So you need to know about it. I know that both of you have participated in the past in our We Remember campaign, which is a social media campaign that has garnered a lot of information, garnered a lot of participants, which has helped a great deal also. Those are only two, and we'll be happy to continue to work with you on all aspects of your fight against anti-Semitism. Our time is up, so we thank you so much for being with us. Anthony notified me today that today is Veterans Day in Canada as well. So we give a shout out to all our veterans in the United States and Canada, and from World Jewish Congress North America, thanking them for their service and thanking them for fighting for our freedom and freedom to be free and not discriminated against. So thank you, Congressman Deutch. Thank you, MP Housefather, and we hope to see you again another time.
Thank you, Betty. Thanks, Ted.
Thanks. Good to see you, Anthony. Thanks, Betty.
Good to see you too.